It's a whole year since the Zygon Inversion first aired. Watch on to find out why I love it so much. Hello everyone and welcome back to Defending Series 9. Today I'm looking at the Zygon Inversion, the second half of the Zygon two-parter. Now as usual, if you haven't seen my review of part 1 yet, please go and watch that now, as I'm going to be referring back to that in this review. So without further ado, here's what I think of part 2, the Zygon Inversion. So when I first watched this story, I found the resolution to the cliffhanger a little bit underwhelming. However, in hindsight, I appreciate it a lot more, because it's so inventive and unique, and for the first time I believe in Doctor Who history, it allows the viewer to explore exactly what it's like for the original humans when they're trapped in the Zygon pods. It's the first kind of direct interaction between the Zygon duplicate and the human they're based on, and it's very interesting because it gives us an insight into how much influence they have over their Zygon counterparts for the first time. As per the past few weeks, the titles were just about in sync this week. I mean, as I say every week, I'm not an expert, but personally I didn't notice any changes, so that's good. So now to the post-titles scene. I think it definitely makes Bonnie appear much more threatening. Turning the Saigon Man inside out is quite a striking, horrifying image that really makes you feel for the Zygons. We've had the thing with the little girls in the previous parts, with them being taken away in a van, and you kind of think, oh wow, and you feel really sorry for them because they're innocent girls. But I think from the whole of this two-parter, this guy being turned inside out gradually as the episode progresses is the most visually striking image that really just makes you think, wow. And you feel really sorry for the Zygons that have to put up with Bonnie and the people like her, the people that just want to live peacefully on Earth. One thing I will say though is, why do those kids just stay and stare at him when Bonnie's filming on her phone, especially when he turns into a full-on Zygon? Surely they'd just run away. Or are they Zygons too, as others have suggested? I don't know, but it's a little niggle that always gets me. Giving Osgood the sonic specs is a nice touch and definitely shakes things up a bit. Overall, the dynamic between 12 and Osgood is very enjoyable, and I think it works particularly well in this story. I think her bubbliness and enthusiasm works well, alongside Capaldi's gravitas and grumpiness. I don't think it would have worked so well with Matt Smith, because there's less of a difference between the 11th Doctor and Osgood in terms of personality, I think. I have to say, I'm not sure where the Doctor's name Zygella came from, but his planet/plan it gag was quite amusing. That did get me this time. Now, as I've kind of touched on already, the depth that this story goes into when exploring the effects and consequences of a Zygon taking on another person's form really makes it the definitive Zygon story in my opinion. For example, Peter Harness's concepts in the scenes between Bonnie and Clara are fascinating, and I also love how the motto, truth or consequences, is brought up again when Bonnie is threatening Clara not to lie and to tell the truth. You know, truth or consequences. The addition of Osgood's first name, Petronella, is interesting, I think, especially for fans that kind of want to tick it off and go, oh yeah, finally we've learnt her first name. But it's kind of borderline irrelevant, really. Although, like I say, it's good to finally know her first name, I suppose. It just doesn't really add anything to the story, apart from a little bit of humour between her and the Doctor, where he claims his first name is Basil. I'm just going to repeat something that I've seen online before here, but it's nice to see the Doctor in a shop again. I think, for the first time since Survival. That's what I read online anyway. But it's a nice touch, and one for the fans to notice there. A little bit of trivia. It is surprising quite how long it's taken for him to have another adventure set in a shop, really. Wow, Doctor. I wonder where he gets his groceries from. I'm going to come back to Saigon Man now again here. Forgive me, but I can't really pronounce his name. I think it's Etwan or something. But I just thought it would be easier to refer to him as Zygon Man. So his suicide, which is kind of the culmination of all the scenes he's in, is really quite disturbing and thought-provoking. When I was talking earlier on about him being striking, it's this image where things are really reaching ahead, and he's this horrific Zygon-human hybrid. And the bit where he gets that lightning bolt from his hand and basically shoots himself really kind of makes you go, wow, this is serious stuff. And it definitely makes you feel sorry for the Zygons, but there are also very unsubtle parallels here with him and immigrants who come over. I think his last line actually is, I just wanted to live here. Why can't I do that? Or something like that, I'm paraphrasing. But it is quite an obvious parallel, and it certainly makes you think about our society as well as the one in Doctor Who. The actual visual effect of his metamorphoses, apart from the fact that it's really disgusting and disturbing, It's really well achieved by the departments involved, and a huge kudos to them really for making it look so horrific and memorable. For me, it really does go down as one of the most successful and memorable effects in the series and in Doctor Who history really. Now I don't know about anybody else, but the music cue that plays when Bonnie walks into the Black Archive and realises there are two Osgood boxes, the bit where we've not found out ourselves yet as the viewer, but she just walks in and stops and goes, "Oh god, there are two of them." It's extremely effective. I don't know how to describe it really. It's kind of like a headache effect. It really sticks out and sounds quite jarring compared to the rest of the soundtrack, giving this headache effect, like I say, as if she's just walked in, sure there's going to be one box, and then suddenly this ice cream pain, this headache, creeps into her head slowly and she just goes, "Ah." So yeah, I'm not sure about anybody else, but I really like that touch, and for me it's one of the highlights of the overall soundtrack of this episode. I just love Kate when she reveals herself as having been human all along, and the repetition of 5 rounds rapid is a really fantastic touch. It's the icing on the cake here. Obviously it's a hark back to her father, the Brigadier, in the Daemons, and although it's a direct copy of what he said, it still works well, and for fans it's an extra thrilling touch, because we've had the revelation that it's her, she's human, and that works for the audience, I think, for the casual audience. Oh, you know, she's come back. But then for fans as well, it's just nice that we get this extra little line here to hark back to the classic series and just give us something special to enjoy. It's great to be back in the Black Archive for the story's final act, even though it looks very different to how it did in The Day of the Doctor. Obviously this is because the set's changed, it's probably been in storage, and of course in The Day of the Doctor, they really went to town in set dressing with all these props from the past 50 years. And aside from the fact that most of them are probably in the Doctor experience now, they probably didn't really have the time to dress it in quite as much detail. And also, I suppose, it would have probably taken away from the effect of the Doctor's speech, which I will talk about in a minute, if there'd been all these little fan-pleasing items in the background. So actually, on second thoughts, maybe it's best that they're absent in this story. But there is the very nice little touch of the Maya helmet, and it's interesting how for the audience, that happened just a few weeks ago, but for units, that invasion happened centuries ago, and after all these years, that random Maya helmet has been picked up and preserved in the Black Archive. I mean, presumably it's the one that Ishilda had on her head, which actually killed her, which is another interesting thought, and another interesting layer to add to it, actually. I hadn't really thought of it that way before. So, the moment of the Doctor's war monologue. When it begins, it really sends shivers down my spine. We all knew it was coming in the episode, although on first watch, I'll be honest, I wasn't too sure on when it had started, although once he'd talked for a couple of minutes, it was very clear that this was the acclaimed 10-minute war speech that had been praised so much in pre-broadcast reviews. And for the most part, I completely agree, it's such a fantastic scene, a real highlight for the 12th Doctor, and for Peter Capaldi's acting ability, it really shows it's off, in a way that we hadn't really seen much before. I mean, we'd never had a 10-minute monologue from him before. Obviously we get much more of that in Heaven Sent, but at this point, in Series 8 and 9 so far, we hadn't had anything like this, so it's great to have something to stretch Peter Capaldi's acting ability and to show it off to the audience. One controversial bit of the speech is the American game show style voice, but I have to say, I don't actually mind it at all. It works very well in the context of the war speech, and I think it is necessary to relate the scale model of war to the game kind of concept, the game show concept with the fingers on buzzers, just to demonstrate how easy it is to press that button and start the war. You know, the point is, it's as easy as someone just pressing a button for a right answer in a game show. One thing I will say is that having no music cues right until the end of the speech helps hugely to build it up to a very emotional climax at the end. It lasts 10 minutes, and by the end of it, you know, I think everybody has been affected emotionally. The audience, all the characters as well, and Peter Capaldi has worked his socks off and blown everybody away. So, in many ways, it's just such a fantastic, really effective scene. And because it's so thought-provoking, I think every audience member that has ever watched it must take something away from it. Because there's just so much to get your teeth into, so much to think about. And of course, it's so relevant as well to the modern day world and issues that we have going on right now. And I think because the connections are quite unsubtle, it really helps to hammer home the point and to make it much more relatable for the audience. Now, of course, the 2 Osgood boxes are empty, but this final twist really is the icing on the cake for me, along with the final memory wipe, because the Doctor would never have put those weapons there in the first place, in the boxes, for Kate and Bonnie to use. The whole point of the boxes is what they represent, not what's actually physically inside them. And by using them to represent all these different weapons, it plays tricks with Bonnie and Kate's minds, which works tremendously well. It's really, really effective, particularly when Bonnie finally realises at the end, and when she works it out in her own head. She's gone from this kind of mindset of being a ruthless dictator to gradually being persuaded by the Doctor, until at the end when she started thinking, as he puts it. You know, you've thought about it, you've considered it, and you've realised that the boxes are empty. It's a fantastic moment to end such a brilliant scene. Of course, another parallel stemming from the Osgood boxes is their similarity to the moment, and choosing a design so similar to them is a great move for fans, because it really does tie events back to the Day of the Doctor again. Another nice touch, because that was the previous Zygon story this one is based on. But it goes to a different part of the story for inspiration, the War Doctor about to press that button on the moment. And I really appreciate the connection to the Time War here, because it shows that the Doctor has learnt from his mistakes, and isn't willing to let somebody else be in that situation that he was in, and make those same mistakes that he almost made, and for a short time was under the impression that he had made from the Ninth Doctor onwards. So overall, I have said quite a lot about this war speech scene, but it just is phenomenal. There's so much to analyse here, and loads of interesting bits to pick out. I really appreciate Osgood's refusal to travel in the TARDIS in retrospect, because it really demonstrates how her character has developed and grown stronger since the Day of the Doctor. If you think about how she was introduced in that story, really geeky, really nerdy, really dependent on her obsession with the Doctor really, and when he's around, dependent on him. But in this story, she's much more independent in her mindset, and although she does still channel that nerdiness, it's not as in your face. She's a much more well-rounded, well-written character, I think, by the end of this story. Providing no answer to the human Zygon controversy as well also shows what a strong character she has become. Admittedly, I always thought this was very underwhelming, particularly on first watch, having been built up and anticipated before this two-parter aired. But looking back, they simply couldn't have ever written it in any other way. Putting emphasis on one side, that's human or Zygons, putting bias on one side, would completely have taken away the impact from the whole message of the story and from the Doctor's war speech. So that's why, looking back now, I really appreciate the ending, with Bonnie taking the form of Osgood, with two Osgoods again, and the peace treaty restored. A really fitting and fantastic ending to such an awesome story that you could say starts in the Day of the Doctor, and then in the Zygon Invasion becomes more political, more global, takes on this real global scale, with bits occurring in different countries all over the world, and then it all comes back to the Doctor's war speech in that room in the Black Archive at the end of the story. So overall, what do I think of this episode? Well, I've famously said in comment sections and in reviews and on Twitter and stuff like that, don't judge a story by its speech. I know a lot of people regard the Zygon two-parter as a whole very highly, but particularly this episode, the Zygon Inversion, and that kind of irritates me, to be honest, because yes, the 12th Doctor's war speech is phenomenal, a really, really fantastic scene, and it makes the episode for me. But the rest of the content of this episode, it's not bad by any means, but it's not kind of in the same league as that war speech. And I just don't really feel that a 10-minute war speech justifies putting this in first or second place or third place in an overall Series 9 ranking, which is why I've never done that. You know, don't judge a story on its speech. The episode was good, a very high standard, as with most other Series 9 episodes, but personally I just find it annoying when it's placed so highly because of that speech. So with that in mind, I think I'm probably going to give this an 8 out of 10. For me, the Zygon Invasion is the better part, just because with the global scale, it's more visually interesting. There's a lot more to get your teeth into, I think, really, and it's more action-packed, more fast-paced, which I kind of like more than the very slow pace of the Zygon Invasion compared to that, because there is a massive difference. It kind of brings everything back down to the Doctor and Osgood and Bonnie and Clara, and those plots eventually kind of intertwine in the final Black Archive scene. But yeah, for me, the Zygon Inversion doesn't quite hit the bar as high as the Zygon Invasion did, but it's still a very good story, and a well-deserved 8 out of 10. Now, just before I end, it's time to see what you think of this story. My first comment today from Mondasian Monster is quite negative, and I really quite strongly disagree with this. I mean, saying the war speech was rubbish is an insult, really. And Bonnie was a great villain. I don't really see why I didn't like her so much. So, sorry, but there is no way at all that I could possibly agree with giving this story a 1 out of 10. Similarly, Suntara123 says a 3 out of 10. He does acknowledge that the speech is good, but says apart from that it's very weak, which I sort of see, but I wouldn't rank it quite so low myself. Other comments this week are generally positive, mostly praising the Doctor's war speech, such as this one here. And I couldn't agree more that by this point in the series, the war speech scene was Capaldi's best moment in the role of the Doctor. Interestingly, this comment from Mark A. Wilson proposes that it might have worked better as one long continuous narrative, which sort of ties into some of the things that I've been saying. It's also interesting how he questions if it was the intention all along to make these two parts very disjointed. Well, I don't personally think the production team went out of their way to make them very different, although clearly, kind of subconsciously, they wanted to make the Zygon Invasion a very big scale, action-packed episode, and then bring Inversion really back down to basics, with much fewer characters, and longer, more thoughtful and dialogue-filled scenes. Isaac Whisker-Dakin notes how the war speech scene really demonstrates the great quality of Doctor Who these days, and how the show hasn't really lost its spark, as I've seen a lot of fans claim. I also agree with him that for the most part, Inversion is a very good follow-up to Invasion, and most things are paid off well. My final comment this week from Jack Coughlin suggests that maybe the obvious terrorism and radicalism undertones were a bit too strong for a younger audience. I mean, I think this episode in particular is quite mature. As with a lot of Series 9 really, it's quite dark, quite mature, and it is aimed at a slightly older audience, but it is a good point, and perhaps it's not quite as suitable for younger audiences as some other episodes. Jack also, quite rightly, identifies the war speech as one of my defining moments for Capaldi's Doctor, but says that he didn't like the way that the Zygons acted. I appreciate that they were a bit different to how they appeared, particularly in Terror of the Zygons in their debut. The whole thing with the peace treaty, and with the Zygons versus the humans in the Osgood boxes, yeah, it is quite different. I mean, the Zygons were never intended to be a race that lived alongside the humans in peace, so this story does offer a lot of new ideas and concepts, which I kind of like, but I can sort of see why some people might not. And also a special shout out to Jack, because on his YouTube channel, The Mechanoid, he started a new series of reviews revisiting Doctor Who Season 4 to celebrate the power of the Daleks being animated on BBC Store, and it's very much inspired by this series, Defending Series 9. The intro is quite similar. So if you like the format of my reviews here, please go and check out Jack's as well. I'm sure you'll love it as much as I did. So thank you so much for watching this Defending Series 9 retrospective review. If you haven't already, please go and check out the other 7 episodes of the series, and comment below your thoughts on the Zygon Inversion. I'd really love to know what you think of this story. Next week, I'll be looking at the very controversial Sleep No More, and I will be defending it quite a lot. So with that in mind, please comment below or tweet to @StetsonDoctor your thoughts and potential arguments against this story, because as someone that quite likes Sleep No More, I'd like to get to the bottom of the hate it receives and really try and fight back and defend it. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for that review. Bye for now.